Hello, friends. Welcome to Read and Learn English, the channel where we help you improve your English through reading, listening, and speaking practice. In every video, we choose stories that are interesting, easy to understand, and full of lessons you can enjoy while learning English. Learning English can be fun and exciting when you practice with stories. Listening carefully, reading slowly, and speaking aloud are the best ways to improve your vocabulary, pronunciation, and confidence. Stories make learning easier because you can imagine the scenes, feel the emotions, and remember the words more naturally. Today, we have a very special story, Gulliver's Travels. This is a famous adventure story about a man named Gulliver, who travels to many strange and amazing lands. He meets tiny people, enormous giants, floating islands, and even intelligent horses. Each adventure is full of surprises, humor, and lessons about life, kindness, and wisdom. This story is perfect for English learners because it is written in easy English, with simple words and sentences. You can read it slowly, listen carefully, and practice speaking the sentences aloud. By following Gulliver on his travels, you will improve your listening, reading, and speaking skills at the same time. Get ready to sail with Gulliver, explore new lands, meet strange and wonderful people, and learn important lessons about curiosity, kindness, and understanding. Let's begin this amazing journey together. Section 1. The Journey Begins. My name is Lemuel Gulliver. I was born in England. Since I was a boy, I loved to read about the sea, ships, and new lands. I always dreamed of traveling to faraway countries. I wanted to see the world with my own eyes. When I grew up, I studied to be a doctor. But not only a doctor for people on land. I wanted to work on a ship so I could travel and help sailors when they were sick or hurt. One day, I heard that a ship was leaving for a long journey across the sea. The captain needed a doctor. I felt my heart beat fast. This was my chance. I said goodbye to my family and friends, and I joined the ship. My adventure was about to begin. When I first stepped on the ship, I felt both nervous and excited. The wooden deck moved gently under my feet. I could smell the salt of the ocean, even though we had not yet left the port. The sails were high above me, white and wide like the wings of a bird. The sailors were busy, running here and there, carrying ropes, boxes, and barrels. They worked hard, but they laughed and sang too. The captain welcomed me with a strong handshake. He was a tall man with a serious face, but I could see kindness in his eyes. He said, "Dr. Gulliver, we are happy to have you on board." I felt proud. I was ready to do my duty. When the ship left the port, I stood on the deck and watched the land slowly disappear. The houses and trees became smaller and smaller. Soon I saw nothing but the blue sea around us. The wind filled the sails, and the ship began to move quickly. My heart was full of joy. I was not only a doctor now, I was also a traveler. Life on the ship was very different from life on land. Every morning I woke up early to check on the crew. Sometimes sailors had small cuts, or they felt sick from the moving sea. I gave them medicine, cleaned their wounds, and told them to rest. They were thankful, and they began to trust me. The sailors taught me many things about the sea. They showed me how to tie strong knots with ropes. They taught me how to read the stars at night. When I looked up, the sky was full of shining lights, and it felt like we were sailing under a great roof of silver. I learned the names of the winds and how they pushed the ship forward. I even learned some sea songs, and I sang with the men as we worked together. There were dangers, too. The sea was not always calm. Sometimes the waves grew tall, and the ship moved up and down like a toy. But I was not afraid. I trusted the captain and the crew. They were strong and brave men. At night, when my work was done, I stood on the deck and looked out over the dark sea. The sound of the waves was like music. I thought about my family at home, but I did not feel sad. I felt lucky. My dream had come true. I was a doctor on a ship. I was going to see new lands. And I knew, deep in my heart, that this was only the beginning of my great adventure. Section 2. The Storm at Sea. The days passed quickly on the ship. The sun was warm, the sea was calm, and the sailors were happy. But the sea can change very fast. One evening, the sky grew dark. Black clouds covered the sun. The wind began to blow harder and harder. The waves grew taller, and the ship started to shake. At first I thought it was only a little storm. I had seen rain before, but this storm was different. The wind roared like a wild animal. The sails cracked and snapped. The ship climbed up on one huge wave and then fell down into another. The sailors shouted to each other, pulling ropes and trying to keep control. The captain's voice was loud and strong, but even he looked worried. Rain poured from the sky. The sea was no longer blue but black and white, full of foam. Water rushed over the deck, and I felt it hit my face like cold stones. I held on tightly to a rope, but my hands slipped again and again. My heart was beating fast. I had never felt so small in my life. Suddenly, I heard a terrible sound. Crack! The ship's mast broke in two. The wood screamed as it split. The sailors cried out in fear. Then came another loud noise. The bottom of the ship was breaking apart. Water poured inside. The captain shouted, "Save yourselves! The ship is lost." My blood turned cold. The ship was sinking. I had no time to think. I grabbed a piece of wood and threw myself into the sea. The waves pulled me up and down. Salt water filled my mouth. I kicked my legs and tried to keep my head above the water. Around me, I could see nothing but darkness and foam. I swam with all my strength. My arms and legs were tired, but I did not stop. I thought, if I stop, I will die. The sea pushed me one way and then another. Sometimes I went under the water, and I felt I could not breathe. But somehow, I came up again and kept swimming. At last, I saw something in the distance. It was land, a dark shape against the gray sky. My heart filled with hope. I moved toward it, stroke by stroke. The waves fought against me, but I kept going. Finally, my feet touched sand. I had reached the shore. I crawled out of the water and fell onto the beach. My body was shaking with cold and fear. My clothes were heavy and wet. My arms and legs hurt, but I was alive. I lay down on the ground, my face against the sand. The sound of the sea was still loud in my ears. My eyes closed. I had no more strength. Slowly, I fell into a deep sleep. Section 3, Tiny People, Big Surprise. When I opened my eyes, the sun was shining. For a moment, I did not know where I was. My head hurt, and my mouth was dry. I remembered the storm, the ship breaking apart, and my long swim. I was lying on the ground, on soft grass. The sound of birds came from above. I thought I was safe, but then I tried to move, and I could not. I was lying flat on my back, but something held me down. My arms and legs were tied with thin ropes. Even my hair was fastened to the ground. I pulled hard, But the ropes did not break. I could only move my head a little. My heart began to beat fast. Who has done this to me? I thought. Suddenly I felt something small move across my leg. Then I felt many tiny feet on my chest. I lifted my eyes and saw the strangest thing in my life. Walking across my body was a man, but he was no bigger than my thumb. His clothes were bright and colorful. In his hand, he held a tiny bow and arrow. I could not believe my eyes. I looked again, and there were more of them. 10, 20, 30 little men, all climbing up and down my body. Some carried tiny spears. Some pulled at my ropes. Some looked at my face and shouted in a high, small voice. Am I dreaming? I asked myself. But no, it was real. I was a giant to them, and they were tiny people to me. Later, I learned they were called the Lilliputians. I tried to move, and the little men screamed. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my arm. They had shot tiny arrows at me. The arrows were so small they did not hurt much, but I understood their meaning. These little people were afraid of me. To them I was a monster, a giant who had fallen from the sky. So I lay still. I wanted to show them I was not dangerous. Slowly, the arrows stopped. The tiny people came closer. They looked at me with wide eyes, full of fear and curiosity. They pointed at my face, my hair, and my clothes. Some touched my hands carefully, as if I were a great mountain. One little man, who seemed important, stood on my chest and made a speech. Of course, I could not understand a word, but his small voice was sharp and quick. I tried to smile at him, to show I was friendly. This seemed to surprise them. A few of them clapped their tiny hands, and some laughed nervously. After some time, they brought food and drink. The pieces of bread were as small as pebbles, and the cup of water was no bigger than a thimble. Still, I ate and drank to show them I accepted their gift. They seemed pleased. As the sun went down, I lay still on the grass, surrounded by hundreds of tiny people. I felt a mix of wonder and fear. Who were they? What would they do with me? I was alone in a strange land, tied down like a prisoner, and watched by a nation of people no bigger than my hand. This was the beginning of my adventure in Lilliput, the land of tiny people. Section 4. Life in Lilliput. The first days in Lilliput were strange and difficult. At the beginning, the little people were afraid of me. They kept me tied with ropes and watched me with their tiny arrows. But slowly, they saw that I was not their enemy. I did not hurt them. I did not fight. I only smiled and tried to be gentle. One day, their leader came to see me. He was dressed in fine clothes and had a small crown on his head. Later I learned that he was the Emperor of Lilliput. He looked at me with great care. Then he raised his little hand, and all the soldiers lowered their bows. That moment was the start of peace between us. The Emperor ordered his people to give me food and drink. It was funny to watch. They brought hundreds of tiny loaves of bread and barrels of wine. To me, it was only enough for one meal. The people worked very hard to prepare food every day because I ate more in one day than 1,000 of them. They laughed when they saw me eat. To them, I was like a giant child with an endless stomach. Soon I was free from the ropes, but I promised I would not hurt anyone. I became a guest of the Emperor, and I was allowed to walk around the city. Everywhere I went, crowds of tiny people followed me. They wanted to see the giant with their own eyes. Some were afraid but most were curious. Life in Lilliput was full of funny differences in size. The houses were as small as bird cages. The doors were so low that I could not even put my head inside. The horses were no bigger than cats, and their dogs looked like little mice to me. When I walked near the city walls, I had to be careful not to step on anyone. I always looked down at my feet so I would not hurt the little people. The children loved me most. They laughed when I picked them up and put them on my shoulders. From up high they could see their whole town. The mothers were first afraid. But when they saw that I was careful, they allowed it. I felt happy, because even though I was far from home, I was not alone. I also began to help the Lilliputians with big tasks. For them, moving heavy objects was very hard, but for me it was easy. Once they wanted to pull a large tree trunk across the field. Hundreds of men pushed and pulled, but it hardly moved. I bent down, picked it up with one hand, and carried it to the other side. The people cheered and clapped their tiny hands. Another time, I pulled their warships into the harbor with a rope. To me, they were like toy boats, but to them, it was an impossible job. The emperor was very pleased. He called me the Mighty Man Mountain. He said I was now a friend of Lilliput. The people gave me gifts, tiny chairs, little boxes of food, and small pieces of cloth. Of course, they were too small for me, but I thanked them politely. Living in Lilliput was like living in a dream. Everything was small, but the people's hearts were big. They accepted me, and I accepted them. I was no longer a stranger or a prisoner. I was part of their world. Still, I sometimes wondered what new adventures were waiting for me. But for now, I was happy in the land of the little people. Section 5. Trouble in Lilliput. For some time, life in Lilliput was peaceful. I helped the people with big tasks, and they gave me food and shelter. The emperor often came to speak with me, and he asked me many questions about England. But one day, I learned that the land of Lilliput had a great enemy. Their neighbor was the island of Blefuscu. The two countries had been at war for many years. The reason for this war was very strange. The people of Lilliput and the people of Blefuscu argued about how to eat eggs. The Lilliputians said that eggs must be broken at the small end. The people of Blefuscu said eggs must be broken at the big end. It was a silly argument, but many men had died because of it. The emperor of Lilliput was very proud. He wanted to defeat Blefuscu once and for all. He said to me, "Man Mountain, you are our greatest strength. With your help, we will win this war." At first, I did not want to fight. I did not wish to hurt anyone. But I also did not want to anger the emperor who had been kind to me. So I agreed to help, but in my own way. I decided not to kill anyone. Instead, I would try to bring peace by using my size and strength. One morning, I walked into the sea between Lilliput and Blefuscu. The water was only up to my waist. I carried long ropes with me. The warships of Blefuscu sailed toward me, but they were no bigger than toys in a pond. I tied ropes to their ships one by one. The sailors screamed in fear, for to them I was a giant monster rising out of the waves. When I had tied many ships together, I pulled them behind me. Step by step, I walked back toward Lilliput. The people of Lilliput watched from the shore. When they saw me dragging the whole fleet of Blefuscu, they shouted with joy. The emperor was so happy that he danced in his tiny shoes. That day, Lilliput became the strongest power in the world of tiny people. The emperor was full of pride. He believed that now he could rule not only Lilliput, but also Blefuscu. He told me to go back and capture the rest of their ships, and maybe even their king. But I did not agree. I said to the emperor, "Your Majesty, I have helped you already. You are safe now. Let there be peace between the two lands. Do not make the people of Blefuscu your slaves." The emperor's smile disappeared. His face grew hard. He did not like my answer. He wanted more power, and he wanted me to help him take it. From that day, his heart toward me began to change. The people of Lilliput still loved me. The children laughed when I walked through the fields. The workers cheered when I helped carry heavy loads. But I felt a shadow growing. The emperor was no longer just my friend. He was also a proud king with big dreams, and I feared that soon his dreams would bring me into trouble. Section 6. Escape from Lilliput. For many weeks after the war with Blefuscu, I lived in Lilliput as a hero. The people loved me. They told stories of the man mountain who pulled ships with his hands. Children sang songs about me. But in the palace, things were not the same. The emperor had not forgotten my refusal to make Blefuscu his slave. He smiled at me in public, but I could see the anger in his eyes. One night I heard news from a kind friend in the court. He whispered, "Be careful, Gulliver. The emperor and his men are planning against you." At first, I did not believe it. But later, I learned the truth. The emperor's advisors told him I was too dangerous. They said, "The man mountain is too big. If he ever turns against us, he can destroy our land. We must control him." The emperor listened. He made a cruel plan. They would put me on trial. Then they would punish me by making me blind. They said this would make me harmless. I would still be strong, but I could not see. When I heard this, my heart shook. I had helped the Lilliputians, but now they wanted to take away my eyes. I knew I could not stay. I had to escape. But how could a giant like me run away without being seen? I waited for the right moment. I ate little, so the guards thought I was weak. I stayed quiet, so they thought I had given up. But inside, I was planning. One night when the moon was bright, I made my move. Slowly, I walked out of the city. The guards were too small to stop me. I crossed the fields and reached the sea. There, to my great luck, I saw something on the water. It was a small boat, perhaps left behind by sailors from Blefuscu. To the Lilliputians it was huge, but to me it was just the right size. I pulled the boat onto the shore. I worked quickly, fixing the holes with wood and cloth. I made oars from long trees. For days I prepared the boat while hiding from the emperor's soldiers. Finally, the boat was ready. I pushed it into the water, climbed inside, and began to row. The sea was wide and endless, but I felt free again. Behind me, Lilliput grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared. I thought of the tiny people I had left behind, the kind ones who had been my friends, and the proud emperor who had become my enemy. My adventure in Lilliput was over. After many days at sea, I saw a ship on the horizon. I waved my arms and shouted. The sailors saw me and came closer. When I climbed on board, I felt strange. These men were my own size again. At first, they could not believe my stories about the little people, but I told them everything. At last, we reached England. I was home again. I was safe. But deep in my heart, I knew this was not the end of my travels. The sea was calling me once more, and greater adventures were waiting. Section 7. Lost at Sea Again. Back in England, I tried to live a quiet life. I saw my family and told them my strange story about the little people of Lilliput. They listened with wide eyes, but I could see they did not truly believe me. For some months, I stayed at home, working as a doctor. Yet my heart was not at rest. The sea was calling me again. I wanted to see more of the world. So, when another ship was preparing for a long voyage, I joined it. The captain was glad to have a doctor on board. We sailed far from England, across wide seas and past unknown islands. For a time, the journey was calm and full of discovery. I thought to myself, perhaps this voyage will be even greater than the first. But one morning, as the ship was near a strange coast, the captain sent a small boat with a few sailors to look for fresh water. I went with them. We rowed to shore and found a stream, cool and clean. But suddenly, the sailors shouted with fear. They looked up the beach, dropped their oars, and ran back to the boat. Before I could understand, they pushed the boat into the water and rowed away as fast as they could, leaving me behind. "Wait, come back," I cried, but they did not turn. Soon the boat was far from the shore, and I was alone. I looked around. The land was green and quiet. But then, I heard heavy footsteps, boom, 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 like drums beating the earth. The ground shook under my feet. I turned, and my mouth opened in shock. Walking toward me was the largest man I had ever seen. He was taller than a church tower. His legs were as thick as tree trunks. His face was high above me, like a mountain. He wore simple clothes, but every button was bigger than my head. In his hand, he carried a stick that looked like a giant pole. I realized at once I had entered a land of giants. The giant bent down and looked at me with eyes the size of windows. His shadow covered me like a dark cloud. I felt as small as an insect. He made a sound, a deep rumble, like thunder. I could not understand his words, but I knew he was speaking to me. I tried to bow and show respect. I wanted him to see I was friendly. Slowly, he stretched out his hand, bigger than my whole body. With careful fingers, he picked me up from the ground. My heart beat wildly. To him, I was no more than a tiny doll. He looked at me with great surprise and curiosity. Then he put me into a leather bag at his side, as if I were a treasure he had found. I was carried high in the air as he walked, each step shaking the earth below. After some time, we came to a huge farmhouse. The giant opened the door and entered. Inside, I saw a woman as tall as he was. Her eyes grew wide when she saw me. She spoke in a loud voice that echoed through the room. The giant placed me on the table, and they both bent low to look at me. I knew then that my new adventure had begun. In Lilliput, I was a giant among tiny people. But here in Brobdingnag, I was no more than a toy in the hands of giants. Section 8. Life Among Giants. The giant farmer carried me carefully to his home. His wife looked at me with wide eyes, then laughed softly. To them, I was smaller than a cat, lighter than a bird, and stranger than anything they had ever seen. They spoke in their deep, thunder-like voices, but I could not understand their words. Still, I could see they were curious, not cruel. The farmer's little daughter, though to me she was taller than a tower, took special care of me. She was gentle and clever. She made me a small wooden bed and even sewed tiny clothes from pieces of cloth. Compared to her huge fingers, I was like a living doll. She laughed when I tried to walk across the table, my little legs moving quickly while she followed with her giant eyes. I soon began to think of her as my protector, and I called her my little nurse, though of course she was much bigger than me. Life among giants was both funny and frightening. At meal times, the family placed me on the table. Imagine me sitting beside a loaf of bread as big as a house, or a plate of meat that looked like a hill. The farmer would cut a piece for me with his knife, a blade longer than my body. Sometimes I needed both hands to lift a crumb of bread. A drop of milk from their cup was like a full bowl for me. One day, a giant cat jumped onto the table and came close to me. Its eyes were as big as my head, and its whiskers brushed against my body like ropes. I froze with fear, but the farmer's daughter gently pushed the cat away and smiled at me. Another time, a dog ran into the house. To me, it was the size of an elephant, and when it barked, the sound shook my bones. Yet the girl picked me up quickly and kept me safe in her hands. News of my strange size soon spread across the land. People came from far and near to see the tiny man. The farmer, hoping to earn money, began to take me to markets and towns. I stood on tables while crowds of giants bent low to look at me. Some laughed, others shouted with wonder. I felt like a show animal, but I had no choice. My little nurse always stayed close, watching that no one hurt me. One day, the farmer took me to the royal palace. The Queen of Brobdingnag heard about me and wanted to see me with her own eyes. I was placed on a table before her and she leaned close. Her face was kind, her smile warm. Unlike the noisy crowds, she spoke softly, and though I could not understand her words, I felt her kindness. She lifted me gently in her hand and studied me like a rare jewel. The queen was so pleased with me that she asked the farmer to let me stay at the palace. The farmer agreed, for he was growing tired of caring for me and saw he would earn a reward. So I was given to the queen, and from that day, my life changed. At the palace, I was treated not as a show animal, but as a guest, though still a very small one. I had a tiny house made from a wooden box, placed on a table in the queen's chamber. The queen often spoke to me, and though I did not know her language well, I could see she enjoyed my company. I was still a toy in the hands of giants, but at least now I was a toy loved by the queen herself. Life in Brobdingnag was strange, but I began to feel safe. Section 9. The King's Questions. Life at the Queen's palace was strange but comfortable. I had a small wooden box as my house and a tiny bed. Every day I walked on the table or on the Queen's hand, and she spoke to me kindly. One day, the King of Brobdingnag came to see me. He was even taller and larger than the Queen. His face was serious and his eyes were sharp. I felt very small, not only because of my size, but also because of the way he looked at me. The king spoke in a deep, slow voice. He asked many questions, and I tried my best to answer. He wanted to know about my country, England. I told him about our towns and cities, about the people, and about the king and queen who ruled there. Then he asked about our laws and our government. I explained that England had many leaders and that we sometimes fought wars to show our power. The king listened carefully. Then he laughed. His voice was loud and shook the walls of the palace. "You humans are proud," he said. "You are small, weak, and fragile, yet you fight wars and believe you are great. Why do you risk your lives for so little?" I felt embarrassed. I wanted to explain that humans had many reasons for their wars, but I realized he was right. From his point of view, our pride and our battles were foolish. I was a visitor in his land, and I had to be honest. The king continued to ask questions. He wanted to know about our kings and queens, our judges, and even our churches. I told him what I knew. Every answer made him laugh or shake his head in surprise. He said, "You humans think you are clever, but you are only clever enough to make problems for yourselves." I felt very small inside. Not only was I a tiny man in the land of giants, but my mind also seemed small compared to the king's wisdom. I thought about England, about our pride, our fights, and our endless arguments. I felt ashamed. Perhaps the king of Brobdingnag was wiser than all the kings in my country. After a long talk, the king smiled. He was not angry with me, but he wanted me to understand his ideas. He told me that people should be kind, careful, and reasonable. "Your pride is dangerous," he said. "If humans were less proud, the world would be a better place." I looked at him and nodded. I realized I had learned a new lesson. In Lilliput, I had been a giant, strong and helpful. In Brobdingnag, I was small and weak, but I also felt the weight of human foolishness. I understood that size is not the only measure of strength. Wisdom, kindness, and reason are far greater than power or pride. That day, I went to my tiny bed in the Queen's chamber and thought about England. I knew that my journey had already taught me many lessons, and there were still more adventures ahead. Section 10. Leaving Brobdingnag. After many months in Brobdingnag, I began to miss my home in England. I liked the Queen and the kind people, but I longed to see my family again. I watched the sea from the palace window and dreamed of sailing home. One day, fate gave me a strange chance to leave. A giant bird appeared in the sky. Its wings were enormous, like the sails of a ship. It flew close to the palace and spotted my little box, where I lived. With one strong claw, it lifted the box high into the air. I held on tightly, afraid I might fall. The wind blew hard, and the box swung back and forth. Below me, I saw fields, rivers, and the huge figures of the people who had cared for me. The bird carried me far from the land. The palace became smaller and smaller, and soon I could see only the endless sea. The wind was cold, and the box moved dangerously, but I did not let go. I prayed that this adventure would bring me closer to home. After a long time in the air, the bird dropped my box into the water. The box floated like a small boat. I was wet and frightened, but alive. I looked around and saw the ocean stretching in all directions. For hours, I floated on the waves, hoping someone would find me. Finally, a ship appeared on the horizon. Its sails were bright in the sun, and it moved steadily across the water. I waved my arms and shouted as loud as I could, though I was tiny to them. The sailors noticed the box and rowed carefully to bring it aboard. They opened the box and helped me out. I was safe at last. On the ship, I rested and told the captain my story. At first, he and the sailors were surprised and could not believe my words. But when they saw my little size and my strange clothes, they began to trust me. They gave me food, water, and a warm place to sleep. I felt hope rising in my heart. Days later, we reached England. I stepped onto familiar land, and my heart was full of joy. The sea had been dangerous, and my adventures had been strange and frightening, but I was finally home. I walked through the streets, telling my story to friends and family. They listened in amazement. Some laughed, some were shocked, but all were glad to see me safe. Though I was home, I knew my travels had changed me forever. I had seen lands where people were tiny, lands where people were giants, and I had learned lessons about kindness, courage, and human pride. But I also knew the sea would always call me again, and that more adventures waited beyond the horizon. Section 11. A Flying Island. After many months at sea, I once again found myself on a new voyage. The waters were calm, and the sun shone brightly. One morning, I noticed something unusual in the sky. It was not a cloud, not a bird, and not a mountain. It was a strange island, floating high above the land. Its shadow moved over the sea like a dark cloud. I had never seen anything like it. I sailed closer and discovered that this island was enormous, but it floated in the air. The people on the ship were afraid. They said it was magic. I was curious, so I prepared to explore it. With ropes and ladders, I climbed carefully up to the floating island. When I arrived, I found a city in the sky. The streets were quiet. The houses were tall and thin, and the people looked different from anyone I had met before. They wore strange clothes, with pockets full of numbers and small instruments. Everywhere I looked, there were books, compasses, and musical instruments. The people were very intelligent, but also very strange. They spoke quickly and thought more about numbers, music, and science than about ordinary life. One man explained to me how the island floated in the sky. Another showed me a device to measure the stars. I tried to ask about food, animals, and daily life, but they seemed confused. They cared only about numbers, music, and experiments. Sometimes I watched them carefully. They would walk along the streets, staring at the ground or their instruments, not noticing where they were going. One man walked straight into a wall while thinking about a math problem. Another spent hours playing music while ignoring the birds and the trees around him. I could not help but laugh at their strange behavior. Although they were very clever, I soon realized that they had little understanding of ordinary life. They forgot to eat sometimes, and some could not speak clearly about simple things. Their minds were full of ideas, but their hearts were not. I thought of England and of Lilliput. There, people were small or weak, but they cared for each other. Here, the people were smart, but they seemed strange and distant. Still, the floating city was impressive. The buildings were tall, the streets clean, and the air was fresh. From the edge of the island, I could look down at the world below. The mountains, rivers, and forests looked tiny, like toys. I felt both amazed and frightened. I spent many days on Laputa, learning what I could and observing the people. I talked to them about music, numbers, and science. They were kind in their own way, but I knew I could not stay long. The world of ordinary people was very different from this floating island. Finally, I prepared to leave. I wanted to continue my journey, to see more lands and more people. The floating island slowly moved above me, and I waved goodbye to the clever but strange people of Laputa. I climbed back into my boat and sailed away, ready for the next adventure. Section 12. Strange Experiments. On Laputa, the people were always thinking and working on new ideas. One day, they invited me to visit their school. The school was very strange. It was full of machines, instruments, and books. The students were busy with experiments that seemed impossible. I watched carefully, curious and amazed. The first experiment was very funny. A teacher tried to turn stones into food. He crushed the stones, mixed them with powders, and shouted numbers while stirring. I waited, expecting bread or meat to appear, but nothing happened. The stones stayed stones. The students laughed, the teacher frowned, and I laughed too. It was silly. Next, they tried to catch sunlight in boxes. They made tiny mirrors and machines and pointed them at the sun. They wanted to bring the sun's light down to the classrooms. I watched as one student held a box for hours. He ran from place to place chasing the sunlight. I could not stop smiling. This is crazy, I thought, but I said nothing. The students were serious, and I did not want to offend them. Even though the experiments were strange, I learned something important. The people of Laputa were patient. They worked for many hours without stopping. They did not give up, even when the results were small or silly. They believed in trying new ideas, even if those ideas seemed impossible. Sometimes I joined them in their work. I tried to help turn a stone into food. I held the powders carefully and stirred slowly, but the stone stayed a stone. The students clapped anyway. They were happy that I tried. Then I helped with the sunlight experiment. I ran with the mirrors, following the sunbeam. I almost fell many times, but the people cheered. I realized that life on Laputa was very different from anywhere I had been. The people were clever and curious, but they did not care much about ordinary life. They spent their time thinking, counting, and experimenting. I could laugh at their silly mistakes, but I also learned something valuable. Curiosity and patience are important. People can learn amazing things if they try hard and do not give up. After a long day, I returned to my small box on the edge of the island. I thought about all the experiments I had seen. Some were funny, some were strange, but all showed the power of imagination. I knew that one day, the knowledge and ideas from Laputa might help people in the world below. I slept that night dreaming of stones, sunlight, and flying machines. Laputa was strange and wonderful, and I was happy to be part of its world, even for a little while. Section 13. Other Islands. After leaving Laputa, I continued my journey across the seas. The winds were kind, and my ship sailed smoothly. I saw many new lands, each one more strange than the last. On every island, the people had their own customs, and I learned that the world was full of surprises. The first island I visited had people who loved talking very loudly. They shouted their words so that everyone could hear them. At first I thought it was dangerous, but I soon realized it was their custom. They greeted each other with shouts and argued with shouts. I tried to speak softly, but they could not understand me. I laughed, and they laughed too. On another island, the people walked only backward. Their homes, roads, and furniture were built for walking backward. At first, I was confused. I almost fell many times. But the people were kind and helped me learn. I realized that their strange habit was normal to them. I laughed at myself, trying to walk the same way. I also visited an island where the people loved wearing very heavy clothes. They wore coats, hats, and boots all the time, even in hot weather. I could not understand why they did this, but they said it was polite and proper. I tried to follow their customs, but I felt hot and tired. I laughed at my own struggles, and the people laughed too. On each island, I saw human weaknesses. People were proud, stubborn, or silly in different ways. Some argued about small things, some wasted time on useless tasks, and some forgot to care for each other. I thought about England and Lilliput, about Brobdingnag and Laputa. Everywhere I went, I saw that humans could be clever, but also foolish. Pride, vanity, and stubbornness were common, no matter the size of the people or the place they lived. Despite their weaknesses, the people on the islands could also be kind and generous. I often met helpful farmers, friendly children, and wise elders. I realized that human weakness was always balanced by goodness. Life was never simple, but it was always interesting. After many months of traveling, I returned to my ship. I looked at the islands I had visited and smiled. Each one had taught me something new. Some customs were strange, some people were funny, but I had learned about human nature in all its forms. As the ship sailed away, I thought about the lessons I had learned. People can be proud, stubborn, or silly, but they can also be kind, clever, and brave. The world is full of surprises, and every journey brings new knowledge. I felt lucky to see so many lands and meet so many different people. Section 14, Meeting the Horses. After many months at sea, I landed on a new, unknown country. The land was beautiful. Green fields stretched far, and rivers sparkled in the sun. But this land was very different from anywhere I had been before. Soon, I saw the most amazing sight. Horses were walking across the fields, but these were not ordinary horses. They were tall, strong, and beautiful. They walked on long legs, and their faces were wise. I realized quickly that these horses were not like ordinary animals. They were intelligent and could speak. These were the Houyhnhnms. I watched them carefully. They were talking to each other in a calm and polite way. They seemed to understand everything around them. Their voices were quiet but clear. They did not shout or fight. Everything they did was thoughtful and organized. I was amazed. But not all the creatures in this land were like the Houyhnhnms. In the forests and hills, I saw strange, wild creatures. They looked like humans, but they were dirty, loud, and cruel. Their bodies were like people, but they had hair all over and behaved like animals. These creatures were called Yahoos. The Yahoos were very strange and frightening. They fought over food, shouted at each other, and showed no manners. The Houyhnhnms did not punish them, but they did not allow them to take control. The horses lived in peace and order, while the Yahoos lived in chaos. At first I was afraid of the Yahoos. They were so wild and loud, but the Houyhnhnms were kind to me. They looked at me carefully and spoke with respect. I realized that I was small and weak compared to them, but they treated me with intelligence and patience. The Houyhnhnms lived simple lives. They worked in the fields, cared for their young, and spoke politely to each other. I learned quickly that their society was based on reason, kindness, and honesty. There was no fighting, no pride, and no cruelty. I spent many days with the Houyhnhnms, observing their way of life. They asked me about my travels, about humans, and about the world I came from. I told them the truth, but they were shocked when I spoke of human wars, pride, and greed. To them, humans were like the Yahoos, wild, foolish, and dangerous. Living with the Houyhnhnms was peaceful, but it also made me think deeply. I compared myself to the Yahoos and to humans in England. I felt ashamed of many things. I realized that people often act without reason, while the Houyhnhnms lived with wisdom and care. This was a new world, very different from Lilliput, Brobdingnag, or Laputa. Here, horses were the rulers, and humans were nothing like them. I had never seen a society so organized, peaceful, and intelligent. I knew my stay in this land would teach me lessons I would never forget. Section 15. Life with the Houyhnhnms. Living among the Houyhnhnms was very different from anywhere I had been before. Every day I watched how they lived and worked. They were calm, polite, and careful in everything they did. They did not fight, they did not lie, and they did not waste time. Everything in their society was simple, honest, and fair. The Houyhnhnms valued truth above all. If they spoke, they said only what was true. They did not cheat, and they never told lies. At first, this was hard for me to understand. In England, people often told small lies or pretended to be brave. But the Houyhnhnms believed that honesty was the most important rule in life. They also valued reason. Every decision, every action, was made carefully and with thought. They thought about the consequences before acting. Even in small things, like planting crops or taking care of young horses, they used their minds fully. Nothing was done carelessly or quickly. Kindness was another value they cherished. The Houyhnhnms cared for each other and for the Yahoos, even though the Yahoos were wild and foolish. They did not hit or shout. They spoke gently and guided them when necessary. I realized that strength was not only in the body, but also in the mind and heart. I spent many days learning from them. I helped in small ways, like carrying tools or observing their work. I tried to speak politely and act wisely as they did. I noticed that the more I followed their ways, the more I respected them. But living with the Houyhnhnms also made me think about humans. I remembered the Yahoos and people I had met in England. I felt ashamed. Humans fought wars, told lies, and were often greedy. Compared to the Houyhnhnms, we seemed foolish and wild. I could see why the Houyhnhnms considered humans so imperfect. I sometimes spoke to the Houyhnhnms about my country. They listened carefully and asked questions. I tried to explain that humans could also be kind and clever, but it was clear to them that most humans acted like yahoos. Their eyes and words reminded me of the truth. Humans have much to learn about reason, honesty, and kindness. Living in their world changed me. I became more careful, more honest, and more thoughtful. I understood that wisdom and peace were more important than pride, power, or money. I wanted to be a better person and to remember the lessons I learned from these intelligent horses. Life with the Houyhnhnms was calm, simple, and meaningful. I was small in their world, but I felt my mind growing larger. I knew I would never forget the lessons of truth, reason, and kindness. Section 16. Gulliver's Sad Goodbye. I had lived with the Houyhnhnms for many months. I learned their ways, tried to be honest, kind, and careful. I loved their peaceful life, and I thought of them as my true friends. But one day, I noticed something strange. The Houyhnhnms were talking quietly among themselves. Their faces were serious, and they looked at me with concern. The next morning, the leader of the Houyhnhnms came to speak with me. His voice was calm but firm. He said that I could not stay in their land. At first, I did not understand. I had done nothing wrong. I had followed their rules. I had tried to be like them. Then he explained. "You are not like us," he said. "You are part Yahoo. Your mind is sometimes like theirs. You speak of lies, of war, and of pride. You cannot live with us forever. You will bring trouble." I felt a great sadness. I had hoped to stay here, to live among wise and kind creatures. I wanted to be part of their world. But now I realized that my nature as a human made it impossible. The Houyhnhnms were right. I could never be completely like them. I tried to argue, to ask for more time, but their decision was firm. They prepared a small boat for me. It was safe, but it was also a sign that I must leave. I packed my few belongings and said goodbye to the horses who had become my teachers and friends. The queen of the Houyhnhnms came to see me last. She lowered her head and looked at me with gentle eyes. Though she could not speak my words, I understood her kindness. I bowed and thanked her for everything she had taught me. The ride to the sea was quiet. The other horses watched me leave, their eyes calm and thoughtful. I felt a deep sadness. I had learned so much, but I had to leave the world I had grown to love. I looked back and promised myself to remember their lessons forever. When the boat floated into the open sea, I felt the wind on my face and the waves beneath me. I was free, but I was also lonely. I thought about the Yahoos, the foolish humans, and my own country. I understood more than ever how pride, greed, and selfishness could make humans weak and foolish. Though my heart was heavy, I knew I had grown. I had seen lands of giants, tiny people, floating islands, and intelligent horses. I had learned about courage, kindness, honesty, and reason. I would carry these lessons with me even as I returned to the world of humans. Section 17. Return to England. At last, after many years of traveling, I returned to England. The sight of familiar fields, rivers, and towns filled me with joy. I thought about my family and friends, and I felt relief to be home again. But life in England felt strange after everything I had seen. The streets seemed smaller, the people busier, and the arguments louder. I looked at my neighbors and thought of the tiny Lilliputians, the giants of Brobdingnag, the clever people of Laputa, and the wise Houyhnhnms. Everything in England seemed different, and I felt small, strange, and sometimes frustrated. I remembered all the lands I had visited and the lessons I had learned. From the tiny people of Lilliput, I learned that pride can be silly. Even small creatures can cause great trouble if they are too proud. I laughed when I thought of their tiny arguments and wars over eggs. From the giants of Brobdingnag, I learned that humans are small, not just in body, but in power and importance. I realized that strength alone is not enough. Wisdom and care matter more than size. From the floating island of Laputa, I learned that knowledge without wisdom is useless. People can be clever and full of ideas, but if they forget kindness and reason, their cleverness can be strange or even dangerous. From the Houyhnhnms, I learned that reason and kindness are true strengths. They did not fight, they did not lie, and they cared for each other. I realized that honesty, patience, and thoughtfulness are more important than power, pride, or wealth. I shared these lessons with friends and family, but many could not understand. They laughed at my stories or thought them impossible, yet I did not mind. I had seen the truth for myself, and that was enough. Sometimes I walked alone in the fields, and thought of the strange lands I had visited. I remembered the tiny Lilliputians, the huge Brobdingnagians, the floating mines of Laputa, and the wise Houyhnhnms. I remembered the wild yahoos and the silly customs of other islands. Each adventure had taught me something new, and I felt wiser for it. Though I was back home, the lessons of my travels stayed with me. I understood humans better, their strengths, their weaknesses, and their endless curiosity. I knew that pride, greed, and foolishness could cause trouble, but kindness, reason, and courage could make life better. Returning to England was a happy ending for my journey, but I also knew that my travels had changed me forever. I could never be the same Gulliver I had been before. I had seen the world in ways most people never could. I had learned, laughed, and grown. And so, I lived my life remembering all the lands I had visited, carrying the wisdom of tiny people, giants, floating mines, and intelligent horses in my heart. Section 18. Final Thoughts. After all my travels, I often sit and think about everything I have seen. I have visited lands with tiny people, enormous giants, floating islands, and wise horses. I have met strange customs, funny people, and wild creatures. Each place taught me something new about life, about people, and about myself. Travel has shown me that the world is full of surprises. There are things we cannot imagine, and people live in many different ways. I have learned that curiosity is very important. If I had stayed at home and never traveled, I would never have seen the world or learned these lessons. I also learned that humans must be humble. Pride and selfishness can cause trouble, but kindness, patience, and reason make life better. In Lilliput, I saw pride in tiny people. In Brobdingnag, I saw human weakness in giants' eyes. In Laputa, I saw cleverness without wisdom. And among the Houyhnhnms, I saw true strength in honesty and kindness. My travels changed me. I try to live with the lessons I learned. I try to be curious about the world, humble in my actions, and kind to others. Even when people are foolish or selfish, I remember that everyone can learn and grow. I want to share my story with you. I hope that by listening, you will see the world in new ways. You can be curious, explore new ideas, and learn from everything around you. You can think, observe, and reflect like I did. You can be humble, kind, and honest in your life. Life is a journey, just like my travels. There are strange lands, new people, and surprising lessons waiting for everyone. We may be small in the world, but our hearts and minds can grow if we pay attention, learn, and act wisely. So, remember these lessons from my journeys. Be curious, be humble, and be kind. Travel, explore, and learn, not only about lands and people, but also about yourself. Life will be richer, more meaningful, and full of wonderful surprises if you do. And with these thoughts, I look back at my travels and smile, knowing that every adventure, every mistake, and every lesson has made me who I am today.